Okay, so anyway, I can get started. So, well, I think that anyone who has been in this industry long enough has been exposed to some sort of vesting of assets. Even as a developer, I'm sure that you have to deal, oh, how do I vest my ERC-20 tokens? How do I release them over time? How do I make sure that the tokenomics schedule is met on-chain in a smart contract fashion? And as an investor yourself, sometimes in a launchpad, in a token locker, you are exposed to buying tokens that are locked and released over time. I mean, this has been a use case that has been around us since the inception of tokens almost. I mean, over 6 years ago, with the inception of ICOs, people are exposed to token release schedules. In my opinion, it's one of our biggest use cases. Nevertheless, everyone does it in their own flavor. Like, even though we have been exposed to this use case for so long, there is no standardization. Like, at the end of the day, you have a way to claim the tokens, you have a way to describe how the release schedule is, and you have a date where the release schedule is done. I mean, this is pretty standard for any sort of token vesting and token locks. Yet, you have dozens of launchpads implementing their own flavor, dozens of token lockers doing it their own way. So, under the identification of this problem, and as a developer, it was like, hey, like, I want to do a vesting contract. Do some research, find out there is no standard, there is like a few open source repositories. But at the end of the day, everyone was doing their own flavor. And even though this works, I mean, we have many token lockers, we have platforms like Hedgy allowing people to lock tokens over time. Nothing is set in stone. There is no standard interface to scale one of our biggest use cases, which is releasing tokens over time relative to a vesting schedule. This tampers adoption and scalability of this type of assets. At the end of the day, imagine, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this platform, I think it's called Token Unlocks. You go there to Token Unlocks, and they have all the release schedules of major assets. But a developer from Token Unlocks needs to dive into each individual smart contract to understand how they work and how the token unlock is described over time. This lack of standardization makes scaling this very common use case, very cumbersome. Like, I wouldn't want to be the developer of token unlocks and having to go there and see every single case, how they implement locking of tokens. At the end of the day, it's a start date, an end date, a curve, and that describes 99% of all vesting schedules. So why not put a standard on top of it and be able to scale this into a new type of asset class that on top of it has the option to be an NFT. So through this standardization, not only we ease third-party integration, we also enable the creation of secondary marketplaces. Like, if we create vesting of assets as a standard common interface, this enables the creation of secondary marketplaces that can very easily detect how many of these assets have already been released, the face value of these assets, and potentially create a new asset type around the vesting of assets that are no longer tied to a wallet. Because the most common approach right now is like, hey, you have a vesting schedule. Give me your wallet. I tie your vesting schedule to your wallet, and that's it. You can't move it. You can't do anything. Like, at the end of the day, let's say you want to, I don't know, like, I think this is something fairly common when dealing with private sales. People have an asset tied to a wallet, they participate in a private sale, they want to resell it, impossible. They need to do verbal agreements, they need to do contracts. I mean, that's not what we are on the blockchain. So I think this is what's interesting. Like, how many use cases we have for this standardization? Like, at the end of the day, we have token locker apps like Unicrypt, Hedgy, Flockify, Team Finance. All these, they have their own flavor of this. Even voting escrow contracts, they are describing the release of assets over time. This could also leverage this standard. Launchpads, on a similar fashion, they have their own release schedules. When they do the launches, they log liquidity, so forth. Imagine if all of these different use cases fall under a new asset class and the possibilities of secondary marketplaces and further integrations that could arise from leveraging a single interface, which of course it's super basic, super scalable. It's not something that aims to like tie developers. It's like, it's the basic. I mean, that's what you are doing. Have a start time. Does people claim assets over time? Does it finish at some point? For all these platforms, the answer is yes, and there are many other platforms that could also leverage this. So how come that after 6 years of dealing with this type of description on smart contracts, we still don't have a standard? And that's what I'm trying to advocate for, and that's the adoption we are seeking with ERC-5725. So wait, I mean, in case it's still not clear why we should use it, I think here we can compare like a few of the more traditional methods that we have around us. For example, accessing a secondary marketplace would be unviable under the traditional methods because most times it's tied to a single wallet. Additionally, without a standard, what incentive has a builder to create a secondary marketplace? Why would you create a secondary marketplace if there is no scalable adoption of this type of assets? Operational costs go to the floor. Like you have libraries for this, you have interfaces, you remove all the guesswork. Third-party integration, token unlocks. I mean, this is a dream come true for token unlocks. Imagine having a standardized interface where you can describe any ERC-20 token unlock. Instead of manually adding the tokens, you could potentially add everything at once and have your platform be way more scalable and comprehensive by leveraging existing standard. And of course, by not tying the token locks to a single wallet, which could potentially be a single point of failure, you can have transfer right over token locked tokens. I know many will be thinking, but I actually want to keep it on a wallet. Well, I mean, the existence of 721 doesn't mean that you can't make it soul-bound. I mean, you can have it represented as a soul-bound NFT, and you still manage the functionality of putting it into a wallet. So yeah, I already went through many of the benefits, but for me the biggest one is like the fact that it's secure and standardized, removing a lot of the guesswork for developers, making it easier for them. Hey, this is how I represent locked assets on chain. Additionally, it's super flexible. At the end of the day, you can use this for many of the use cases I described, but it can also be used to create financial derivatives. You can create products like bonds, bills that release assets over time, and this can also be represented by the standard. At the end of the day, anything that releases assets over time could be represented by the standard, and that was one of the goals when we were designing this. So yeah, what can I do with this information? How can I learn more? Well, there are a few implementations that already exist. Apebond is one of the biggest adoption implementations that did this and created a financial primitive on top of this. Additionally, my colleagues and myself, we created 5725 Cafe, which is a playground. You can go there, connect with Go Early, try the different vesting curves, try the different standards, and eventually this is going to scale into a multi-chain comprehensive token locker. Of course, if you're a developer, I think a good starting point is going, reading through the interface, and learn more about the standard. You can be part of the conversation on the ETH forum. And of course, you can talk with me. My name is Ignacio, digitally known as Apegurus. Like I am trying to drive the adoption of this because sometimes when you are working with standards, well, by the way, this was already merged and approved by the Ethereum Foundation, so it's an official standard. But still, when you're dealing with standards, you always have this chicken and egg problem, like who is going to build the secondary marketplace if the provider doesn't use it in their token locker, but why the token locker is going to integrate if there is no secondary marketplace? So that's why I'm doing this show. That's why I'm doing this presentation here and trying to reach out to as many relevant people to push the standard forward and working together to scale this use case into the size it deserves. Like, I think that this has been long enough that every dev is like, okay, how I'm going to do besting this time, or how I'm going to do besting? It's like, let's all agree on doing besting in one way that we can leverage and scale to the size this industry deserves and to the time this use case has been around. And well, I hope that makes sense. This was built for apes and from apes. Let's keep building together, and if there are like any questions or comments, I don't know if I have time. Otherwise, you can talk to me after the presentation. It has been a pleasure. Yeah, thanks everyone for listening, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, awesome. Any questions? Cool. I see a question on the back.
Can this implementation be used for renting NFTs?
Renting NFTs that
Renting of an NFTs. I'm the owner of one ape.
are you getting paid for your NFT over time?
And rent it by means of this implementation for someone else to use it, but he cannot transfer it to any other, and he should only give it back to me whenever I want.
Potentially, I would need to understand a little bit more about the use case and who gets paid in what fashion, but it can potentially be used like that. I mean, you can rent the vested assets. It's like maybe you want someone to get your vesting NFT for 6 months, you rent it to them, and they get
Something
to
like
claim during that period of time. Yeah, that's technically possible. At the end of the day, it's a standard 721 that represents your claim to those assets. So whoever is holding has the claim to those assets.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much again. Big round of applause.